vision come to be. Fire burn bright, free the word deep inside of me. By your light, let my vision come to be. Fire burn bright, free the word deep inside of me. By your light, let my vision come to be.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Kindling the Hearthfire. How is everyone in the Northern Hemisphere during this Imbolc? I hope everyone is planning to celebrate and have a great time. I know I am. Later today is my Protoghost ritual and potluck, and I just can't wait. I know I say that every time, but I really love being able to get together to celebrate the turning of the seasons with my grove. I also want to say hi to my listeners in the Southern Hemisphere. I hope you have a great time at your Lunasa celebrations. This time last year, I began this podcast, and we are now beginning our second year. This year, I hope to continue to grow as a show and create wonderful content for you, my listeners. Next up, we have our discussion on what the ancients did during this time of year. And this time, you're in for a real treat, because we will be briefly talking about some Welsh traditions. And just as a disclaimer, I cut out a lot of the Welsh that is being spoken in this particular discussion, but what little is there, I'm probably going to mispronounce, and I do apologize. I did my best to find pronunciation keys for everything. Gwyl Fair Canwyll, which in English means Mary's Festival of the Candles, is the Welsh name for its equivalent of Candlemas, which is celebrated on the 2nd of February. It's connected with the coming of the spring, but it is not connected with St. Bridget of Kildare, as Imbolc is in Scotland and Ireland. In the darker part of the year, probably around the time of either Samhain or the winter solstice, candles were distributed, either purchased by the people themselves or given to them by family members as gifts for Yule. I'm kind of guessing here because my sources were kind of vague on where the candles come from, but it is a common custom to be given a Yule candle, so I think my assumption is pretty sound. This part of the year is called Esmer Gwylad, or the time of keeping vigil. The dark part of the year starts with the blessing of the candles and then the distribution of them to be used during the dark part of the year. It is during this time of year, during Imbolc or Candlemas, that the candles are either returned in a procession of lights towards the local parish, or in one recorded instance, it was customary for people to light 2 candles and place them on a table or a high bench. Then each member of the family in turn would sit down on the chair between the candles and take a drink out of a horn or a goblet or beaker or some kind of cup with both a top and a distinct bottom. Afterwards, they would throw the vessel over the head, and if it fell in an upright position, the person who threw it would live to reach a very old age. If it fell bottoms up, or the person would die early. The drink used, it was usually beer, which was associated with Candlemas as well. The custom of wassailing, which involved wishing for fertile crops and an increase of livestock in the coming year for those who provided the wassailers with ale, is kind of similar to the ceremonies in Ireland for St. Bridget's Day. The early spring was the time to ensure production and fertility for the crops and the animals. If the sun shone on the altar on Candlemas Day, it was thought that there would be an abundant harvest the following year. However, if even a single crow was seen hovering or circling over the home or over the altar on the eve or day of Candlemas, it was considered unlucky. There's also a tradition of hopeful weather prediction around this time, and there's a traditional rhyme that goes, "If Candlemas Day is clear and bright, winter will have another bite. If Candlemas Day brings cloud and rain, winter is gone and will not come again." There's also hintings of Candlemas singing or caroling celebrations around this time of year, very kind of similar to what we do during Christmas for wassailing and carolers going around singing to everybody. And another celebration is held around this time would be Saint Dwynwen's Day. Saint Dwynwen is the patron saint of friendship and love, and she lived during around the 5th century and was by all accounts one of the prettiest of the 24 of her sisters. The story goes that Dwynwen fell in love with Maelon Daffodril, but unfortunately her father had already arranged that she should marry someone else. Maelon was so outraged that he assaulted Dwynwen and left her. In her grief, she was obviously very upset after this happened. She fled into the woods where she begged to forget him. After falling asleep, obviously exhausted, Dwynwen was visited by a spirit, and some places even says that God visited her by sending an angel. They appeared carrying a sweet potion designed to... It's kind of unclear at this point what exactly the potion does. Some versions of the tale say that it erases memory of Maelon for Dwynwen. And in some cases it says that it is to be given to Maelon to freeze him into a block of ice. Either way, she supposedly forgets Maelon, and he's turned into a block of ice at this point, which I think is very a good punishment for what he's done, personally. Dwynwen is then given 3 wishes. First, she wishes that Maelon be thawed. Second was her wish that she be allowed to meet the hopes and dreams of true lovers. And this is kind of an archaic kind of way to say she wanted to help out anyone who was in her same position. And the third thing that she wanted was that she would never marry. All 3 were fulfilled, and as a mark of her thanks, Dwynwen became a nun and hermit for the rest of her life. Okay. Kind of an odd little story for the Welsh version of St. Valentine's Day, but it gets even better. The remains of Dwynwen's church can be seen today on the island of Llandwyn, off the coast of Anglesey. Also situated on the island is Dwynwen's well, where allegedly a sacred fish swims. This fish's movements supposedly predict the future fortunes and relationships of various couples. Visitors to the well believe that if the water boils while they are present, then love and good luck will surely follow. The popularity and celebration of St. Dwynwen's Day has increased considerably in recent years, for some reason, with special events such as concerts and parties often being held and greeting cards being printed. Although still not as popular as St. Valentine's Day in February, St. Dwynwen is certainly becoming better known. As a side note, something I found very fascinating while researching the story. Her name is a combination of 2 syllables, Dwyn or Gwyn and Wen. These are familiar sounds for anyone who knows Welsh, because they're found in many Welsh names. Gwyn and Gwen at the start of names, and Wyn and Wen at the end. Wyn is always masculine and Wen is always feminine. Its basic meaning is white, pure, or blessed. But generally speaking, these syllables actually speak to some kind of divine nature for the person with the name. And you can you can see these endings, such as the ending of Wen, and names like Caradwen and Bronwen, who are obviously goddesses. It's an interesting little side note and something to look at when reading about Welsh saints. Now moving on to the submission section of the podcast. This first submission comes from Reverend Sean Harborough from the Sierra Madrone Grove down here in Sacramento. He and I got into a very long discussion about Bridget and about how Imbolc is practiced in his grove. And these are some snippets from that conversation.
Our grove had a day where they got together and they made votive candles. I think that actual tradition just started organically. Last year, we decided that was kind of a neat thing to do, and that we would make these candles and bless them and then present them as part of our working for the ritual. But Candlemas is the Christian equivalent of Imbolc. And so there's a large tradition built around the blessing of candles, and there's a ritual mass in the Catholic Church where they take 2 candles and they hold them up to everyone's neck and they bless everybody in the congregation. That ritual of Candlemas, or the blessing of the candles, and the holiday of the candles, or however it's called, is a long-standing tradition of holding these candles up and using them as a blessing towards the folk in general.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a deep-rooted tradition within the Gaelic and obviously the Welsh culture to remember the whole point of the light. Fire is used as a dual-purpose item. It's used to illuminate and it's used to give warmth. It also has a third function of cooking your food. So these things come into play when it comes to the significance of the fire. Both in the fire festival and the pagan realm, it only stands to reason how important the notion of illumination and candles would be. For us, in a modern sense, it was kind of a natural, organic growth to do something that was related to something that we could incorporate into our ritual.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In years past for Imbolc, we would focus on milk and the reverence for how lambs are born this time of year, and we would have a tradition of using used milk to use as a blessing onto the land and to celebrate the rebirth of the coming of the spring and the longer days and growth, and know that spring is upon us. Our stuff is shifted, especially with influx of new members and things. Our focus has grown and evolved. Bridget is the traditional goddess in the Celtic realm that is honored during this time of year, and is a goddess of a multitude of things, midwifery, and she's a fire goddess. She's also a goddess of wells. She's a goddess of healing. She's a goddess of the forge. She has a multitude of things that she does in the stories and in the lore and as a functionary. Most notably is she is the caretaker of the fire of the monastery of Kadara. And so she's one of the few Celtic goddesses that has evolved into a saint. She was so revered in the Celtic lands that she crossed over with the coming of Christianity to Ireland. So she has an importance in the whole tradition, especially in the Celtic realm.
Thank you, Sean, for discussing this very important festival. It was very good talk, and we got into a lot of different subjects, which had absolutely nothing to do with Imbolc. But I could basically sit with Sean for hours and never be bored by what he has to say, because he's such a font of knowledge, and I want to thank him for sitting down with me and speaking about Imbolc, among other things. Next up, we have another submission from another Reverend Rob Henderson.
Hi again, it's the Reverend Rob Henderson, here to talk about Imbolc traditions, and specifically my Grove's NDraíocht tradition. Way back in the earliest days of the Grove, even before I joined, when Fox was still our senior druid, we relied very heavily on a book called The Year in Ireland by Kevin Donaher. Apparently it's still available, so check it out if you can afford $125 for it, or you can get it used for $25 according to Amazon. It has a lot of details of folk traditions in Ireland that we based our Irish Grove's earliest practices on. Around this time of year, for Imbolc, one of the traditions that in the villages, I think this was more of a medieval thing than an ancient thing. These are more medieval traditions that we were looking at in the hopes that they would be a continuation of earlier traditions that we could adapt to our own pagan ways. Anyway, the NDraíocht was a tradition where a group of children would take a corn dolly, corn being wheat, of course, when we're talking British Isles, not maize, would make a dolly out of corn stalks, wheat stalks, carry it. They would dress up in shabby clothing, often bring puppets with them, and go around the village just rampaging around and knocking loudly on people's doors and barging in and demanding food for the corn dolly. We looked at that, and obviously that's a very interesting tradition, kind of an extreme form of trick-or-treating. We didn't necessarily want to be insistent upon this, but we kind of worked in, as Briege is a goddess of the hearth, we thought maybe bringing hearth blessings from house to house in a processional form would be a good way to apply it. So we did wear silly hats, and we did bring puppets, and we also have a corn dolly. We used to make a different corn dolly each year. Our crafty people weren't really interested in doing that for too long, and we've had the same corn dolly for about a decade now. But yeah, we would carry from house to house. We'd drive in a procession, a convoy as it were, and go to the houses of people who had requested it. We weren't going to demand things. That's a little bit non-consensual for us to be doing in modern pagan practice. But we would go where we were invited. The hosts would serve us food. We would sing some songs of Briege and carry the dolly all around the house, sort of present the house to her or present her to the house as a form of blessing. And it was a lot of fun. It was an interesting way to get to meet people. People were supposed to clean their houses beforehand. It was part of the whole spring cleaning tradition of Imbolc. Some of our modern folks did do cleaning, and some didn't maybe quite do as much as they should have. But we did the tradition for several years. Unfortunately, declining Grove membership and the fact that we're all kind of getting old and not that interested in driving around in January in Michigan quite so much kind of slowed it down for us. It's still a tradition of ours that I very much enjoyed and I think fondly of. And I hope that some young, energetic folks out there will look into it and maybe do their own version of the NDraíocht and carry the dolly around and demanding some food. By the way, we did collect food for food gatherers, the local food bank that we do a lot of our charity work with. So we did have that element of the gathering food as we were going around. But not demanding, technically not demanding, as I said. Anyway, yeah, that's one of our old Shining Lakes Grove Imbolc traditions. You can look up more info on it on our website, actually. I think we even have a few of our silly NDraíocht songs on there. So, whether you go house to house or not, everyone have a happy Imbolc.
Thank you so much for everybody that submitted, and I hope to get more submissions next time so we can hear what the Druids are up to during this time of year. Next up, we have the recipe for Imbolc. And since we are moving into Imbolc, I felt it appropriate to incorporate butter into the recipe as much as I could. Imbolc literally means bag of butter, and Brigid is associated with butter quite heavily. The recipes I have for you today are sugar cookie recipes and butter cookie recipes. And what I'm actually going to be doing with the sugar cookie recipe is I'm going to be placing it in a ceramic cookie mold that happens to be shaped like a sheep. And we're going to be using that for our Imbolc ritual to offer to Brigid. I thought that was appropriate. I actually found the ceramic mold amongst my mother's things, and they were actually going to be thrown out, and it seemed appropriate to use it for this particular festival. If you do not have molds, that's fine. They make wonderful cookies. Okay, so the first recipe, the one I'm going to be using for the cookie mold, is the sugar cookie recipe. And this particular recipe serves about 12. It's kind of a small batch. At least I think it's a small batch anyway, because I make big cookies usually. But the preparation and the cooking take about 1 hour and 15 minutes altogether. And the list of ingredients here is you need to have half a cup of butter, 3/4 cups sugar, 1 large egg, 1 tablespoon milk or a tablespoon of cream, whichever one you have on hand or you like more, 1/3 of a teaspoon salt, and 1 teaspoon vanilla, and then 2 1/4 cups of flour. And the recipe itself assumes it assumes that you're going to have an electric mixer, but for most of this you really don't need one, but it does make it a lot easier. So the recipe goes like this. With an electric mixer, cream the butter, sugar together until they are fluffy. Then beat in the egg and the milk and the cream. Or milk, whatever. Then you add vanilla. Mix it all together until it's fully combined. You don't want to mix it too much, so just until it's fully combined. And then you're going to add the flour and salt at this point. And you're going to add it slowly because the flour tends to make it a little bit harder to stir together. It turns it into a kind of a doughy consistency. So mix it until it's combined well. And then after it's combined well, you remove the dough from the bowl onto a lightly floured surface. You're going to knead the dough briefly, not too long, or it'll be a very tough cookie. And you form it into a ball. Then you wrap that with plastic and chill in the refrigerator for 30 minutes. Or you can give it a quick chill in the freezer for about 10. What I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to leave it in there overnight. Because I'm going to make these in the morning so they're extra fresh for everybody when I'm coming to ritual. But it has to chill in the fridge to make it easier to work with, basically. While the dough is chilling or after it's been chilled, and you want to make the cookies now, preheat the oven for 350 degrees. If you're going to use the mold, this is what you're going to do with the mold. Take your mold and lightly brush oil of some kind. I usually use melted butter because I've heard that works a little bit better rather than just plain oil. Brush it lightly. Make sure that you don't put too much on there. Then you flour the molds and tap out the extra flour. The amount of flour really isn't terribly important except for looks. So I would put as much flour as you possibly can and then tap out the excess. And then you will take a piece of dough and starting at one side of the mold, press it firmly into the mold, adding more dough as needed. Be sure to level the back of the cookie and make sure you get the dough into all the crevices because the mold could have a lot of details you want to get and you want to really firmly press it in there so it gets all that detail. Now, turn your mold over and strike it a couple times to release the mold. It's a ceramic mold. It's meant to be smacked around a bit, so don't be too heavy-handed, but don't be too gentle with it either. It can handle a little bit of abuse. The cookie should come right out. Repeat the flour dusting of the mold before molding another cookie. Don't use the oil again, because once again, you don't want to over-oil it. Okay, and then place the formed cookie on a baking sheet with detail side up and bake in the top third of your oven. Having it so close to the top actually helps highlight the nice detail of the cookie. And you're going to bake it for about 10 to 12 minutes, depending on how many cookies you've made with the mold and all that good stuff. Here are some helpful hints that they give me with the recipe for this particular one when you're using molds and such. Once again, don't be timid about striking the mold on the cutting board. It will not break if you hold it upright while striking it on its edge. Be careful, but don't be timid. If the cookie does not release, you have used too much oil. Clean the mold with a stiff, dry brush, reflour, but don't re-oil, and try again. If your cookies are puffing up and losing detail, use a smaller egg. If they are spreading out and losing detail, use less sugar. Chill the cookie mold as well to ease with the release of the cookie. It helps, I think, the oil solidifies, so it gives it a layer between the mold, so it'll come out a little bit easier. If you're using a mold with multiple sections, like the one in the photo for the recipe, and I'll give you a link to this recipe just so you have it, do one cookie section at a time, not the whole mold. That's kind of self-explanatory. Okay, so then the second recipe is for some butter cookies. And these ones are just cookies. They're not meant for the mold, but you can use the mold if you like. And these cookies take about maybe 30-35 minutes or so. And the yield is about 48 cookies. All right, and so the ingredients for the butter cookies, it's not as different as you might think from the sugar cookies. There's I think 2 ingredients that are a little bit different. Not much though. So the first ingredient is 8 ounces unsalted butter. And then you've got 3/4 cup granulated sugar, 1/4 teaspoon salt, and 1.5 teaspoons pure vanilla. And then you have 1 large egg yolk, just the yolk, and 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And the directions for this recipe are very simple. You beat the butter, sugar, salt, and vanilla together until they are smooth and creamy. Mix in the egg yolk until well incorporated, scraping down the sides of the bowl at least once. This kind of assumes that you're going to be using an electric mixer as well, but you can do it by hand. It just takes a little bit longer, it takes a little bit more work. Can be done. I've done it. Add the flour and mix until just incorporated. Just like the sugar cookie recipe, you don't want to overmix this, otherwise you're going to get a very tough cookie. Okay, and once it's well incorporated and it turns a kind of a doughy consistency, you will scrape it onto a lightly floured board and knead it a few times, just until the dough smooths out a little bit. Turn onto a sheet of plastic wrap and roll it into a log. Wrap it up and refrigerate it for several hours, or you can freeze this. Before baking, you preheat the oven to 325 Fahrenheit. Then you line your baking sheet with parchment, or you can put oil on there, or you can put nothing on there like I do usually, because there's lots of butter in here. It shouldn't stick. But if you're really paranoid about it sticking, parchment paper or oil is probably the way to go. Okay, and what you're going to do with the dough is you're going to slice it. Okay, you're going to slice the dough into about 1/8 of an inch slices, and place them on the sheets about 1 inch apart. They won't be spreading much, but they do need the air room around each other. Okay, and then you're going to bake until just beginning to turn golden around the edges. They say about 16 to 18 minutes, but it kind of depends on how thick your cookie is. So check it after 10 to 12 minutes, and then if it's still not at this point, add about 2 or 3 minutes after that, and keep adding them until it actually reaches this point. Each person's oven's a little bit different, and where you're cooking is going to make it a little bit different, so just keep an eye on it, because these can burn really easily. And burnt butter cookies are edible, but not as good as non-burnt ones. I'd always eat butter cookies, whether they're burnt or not anyway, but note, you can always do many things with these cookies. You can roll the dough out and cut shapes. You can slice them even thinner and sandwich them with chocolate or jam or lemon curd. Really great idea, I think. Or you could make them and then dip them halfway into chocolate. Or you could just make them eat them, which is my favorite idea, and one I'm probably going to be doing. Whatever you do, these cookies are meant to be really, really, really delicious. Okay, so next up, after those lovely cookies are done and made, you can sit down with a good book in our book review. So next up is our book review, and this time around we're going to be reviewing the Irish Celtic Magical Tradition by Steve Blamiers. Okay, this book is basically a line-by-line examination of the first battle of Moytira and piecing together an Irish magical tradition based on this examination. All in all, it's a very thorough examination and lots of commentary by the author about what it all means. It's very easy to read, with practical exercises for each section, including trance meditation journeys for the reader to use for their own edification. It can be very dense at times with all the information, but overall it's a really easy to get through book and would be easy to read again for more information. You get a lot of information out of this book. I agree with most of the commentary by Blemires, though I will say that it has a slightly Wiccan slant that I can find a little off-putting. But overall, the tone is friendly and the information easy to understand and follow. The main parts I disagreed with were the interpretations of the story of Diane and his son Miak. It came as a surprise when Blemires' interpretations went no deeper than the murder for jealousy angle that is obvious on the surface, when so much of the book was looking into so much deeper detail. Another interpretation from a speaker at the ADF suite last year at Pantheacon, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but I'll put it in the show notes when I remember it or I find out who it is. Her interpretation actually is that the father killed the son because his actions caused conflict in the choice of king, which I think is a more apt lesson and makes a lot more sense, personally. Another red flag that showed up was that there are no citations throughout the work, and getting to the end, there was no bibliography at all. Without a source for his ideas and beliefs about symbolism and what things mean, I cannot with a clear conscience say this is worth keeping on the bookshelf. Only if you want someone's opinion would I keep this, because it reads more like an opinion article that you would read and find interesting than a reference material. It's truly sad to say because it was an interesting read, and I would love to see where he gets some of his ideas and see how far I can go with my own research using his sources. So sadly, this one goes in the bin. It's available on Amazon. I will put a link in the show notes, and hopefully the bibliography is coming soon in a new edition, maybe? Okay. Next up, we have the community calendar, and just a few facts about the calendar coming up. The official cross quarter for Imbolc is on Saturday the 3rd of February 2008 at 11:21 Eastern Time, and the closest full moon is on the 31st of January at 8:26 a.m. Eastern Time. Okay, and some festivals that are coming up in the near future. The closest one that's going to be coming up is Pantheacon in February. This is a Panpagan convention that I go to every year, and this year it's happening at the Doubletree Hotel in San Jose, California, and it's happening around it actually is happening on February 16th to the 19th. And if you want more information, their website is pantheacon.com. And their theme for this year is actually Sustainable Caring Community. And next up, we have another convention that's coming up in February as well. It's called Convocation. And this also is a Panpagan convention that ADF has a presence at. And it actually starts on February 22nd and goes to the 25th. And it is going to be held at the Dearborn/Detroit Doubletree by Hilton. And their website is... It's a little bit complicated, so let me read it out. It's https://sites, sites.google.com/a/convocation.org/convocation/home. And I will be posting all these links so you won't have to type that in. But yeah, that's our website if you want any more information on what's going on at Convocation this year. Okay. And the next one that's coming up, is happening in March. It's Pantheacon. And it is happening from March 16th to the 18th. And this is also happening at a Doubletree Hotel, but it's the Doubletree Park Place in St. Louis Park. I believe that's Minnesota. And their website is Paganecon.org if you want any more information on how to register and see what's going on at that particular festival. And the last festival or convention that we're going to mention this time around is also happening in March. It's GhostyCon. It's Ghosty-Con. And it is happening from the 22nd of March to the 25th. And it will be happening at the Best Western Albany Airport Inn in Albany, New York. And their website, once again, if you want to find more information, is going to be at ghosty-con.org. And just a slight warning, this website is very hard to read, especially for people who have issues with red and green. It has a bright green background with bright blue letters for the links, and it's very hard to read. Just a warning, but I did send them a notice saying that their website was very hard to read. So just a heads up on that. So those are the festivals that are going on in the near future that ADF either has a presence at or they are running themselves. Wrapping up, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to the podcast, either by listening or with your submissions or even on Patreon. I've got a few patrons on there that I want to thank, and I want to make sure they know they are very welcome. I would also like to thank Bonnie Landry for her wonderful voice that you heard in the intro of the show, singing Fire Burn Bright, a chant written and composed by our own Diane Bronowicz. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. All other music and images belong to their creators, with all rights reserved and all that good stuff. Right now, you can find our podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, Google Play, and on Patreon. I would appreciate any and all reviews, especially on iTunes, because reviews there really help make it easier for more people to find us. If you want to help support the podcast, go on Patreon. I have 2 levels or tiers for patronage, each with their own rewards and privileges. The first tier is the $1 one, which gets you access to all the podcasts, including a mini show that is centered around the Dedekind path and my journey down it. The next level up is the $5 tier that gives the option of being featured on the podcast, on top of the access to all the other episodes. Go to Patreon to check it out and help support the podcast. All websites mentioned will be listed in links in the show notes as per usual, and also on the blog, which I will also put in the show notes a link to that as well. Thank you for listening, contributing, and supporting. May you and yours be well, and always may you all pray with a good fire.